Hello, friends. Welcome to Leaders on Tap. Today, I am pleased to be speaking with Steve Simmons. Steve is the CEO of a tech firm called Restyn. He is the pastor at the church that he leads at, and he is an author. And today, you're going to hear our conversation about his newest book, which is called The God Hour. It's a 60-day journal for leaders. We are going to talk about his journey from childhood trauma to now how he advocates for children. And then we're going to talk about his people first, the future is human, he says, approach to technology in this AI everything world. So I invite you to take this in. It is certainly one of the most intimate and raw conversations that we have had to date. Steve is a brilliant mind. I encourage you to watch it, to share it, and may it be a blessing to you, your life, and your leadership. Steve, welcome to Leaders on Tap.
Nice to be here.
Brother, I am honored that you would make time to have this conversation with me. You and I, at this point, we could probably say we go way back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
Years.
Been blessed to walk with you, and we'll have more of an intro in the comments, and I'll add it pre-roll here. But Steve Simmons is bivocational, so you are a CEO of a tech firm, you are a pastor of a church, you are an author, which we're going to talk about today. I have heard people describe you as one of the best speakers they've ever heard. So you're a speaker as well. Mm-hmm. And there's so much you and I could talk about today. And we're going to try. I'm excited to round a lot of bases. But I want to start with what's most recent and fresh, and that is really exciting and cool. And that's this book that you recently penned with your bride, yes, Gabriella, called The God Hour. So maybe let's start there and tell us, what was the catalyst for that? And let me just say this. What I know about Steve, at any given time, Steve, you probably had at least 2 or 3 books.
I do.
That you were processing up here. Yeah. So it was cool to see this come out.
It is kind of amazing for me to finish something. So
classic visionary.
Yes, that is me. I've been working on this one, I guess, the longest. So it was like the tortoise, it kind of worked for years and years. And finally, I was like, I'm going to finish that one. And it was kind of a decision. The other book I was working on was kind of a close second that may still come out, was a more technical look at leadership and how people make mistakes in how they manage technology in business. Okay. And the reason I chose the God Hour instead is I was looking at the real mistakes that are being made right now, especially when you look at AI and the decisions made about that. There are technical elements to the failure in decision-making in the C-suite around AI, but it's much more a human failing, much more a moral failing or ethical failing or understanding of the impact. And so I wanted to kind of bring that forward and say, leadership comes from the inside out, and our character has far more to do with our impact in the world than our technical understanding of a specific era in computing or something.
I love that. Even how your great depth around technology, God would use that to inform. And I have to say, in the work that I do with Christian business leaders, sometimes it's a little exhausting, if not boring, how many times when we pull a thread about something going on, it comes back to an identity issue. Yeah. Almost always.
Almost always. Yeah.
So, and I noticed, as far as I've gotten into the God Hour, which I've really enjoyed, that's right where you start, right? Is with that identity. So I'm curious. It's a 60-day journal devotional, right? Mm-hmm. Where did that format? How'd that come about?
So I was writing just devotional reflections for literally years, almost a decade, and went back and sorted through and found the ones that I liked the best. And I was talking to my wife about it, and she was saying, "That's great, but it's kind of like preaching." Right? We need more engagement. We need more, if you actually want to have impact, you need to have a conversation. Yeah. So how can you put a conversation into a book? Yep. And so she was the one who said, well, why don't we make this into a journal? So I love reading your stuff. I know other people love reading your stuff. Why don't you write the chapter, and then I'll write the questions to bring the reader in to reflect on it. So that's the pattern in the book is the journal prompts are Galadriel's, and the chapters are mine.
I have to say, I stink, I'll use that word, at journaling. And yet I found the questions really engaging, whether I journal after them or not. Like sometimes I'll work it into my workout or something, and they've been very thought-provoking. I love how you guys collaborated on that. That was going to be one of my other questions. And I also know you're a detailed thinker, so I was kind of like, wow, like somebody really wrangled my brother to kind of whittle these down. Each devotion is what?
Yeah.
How long?
Like 1,000 words, maybe.
Yeah. So it's a quick but very impactful read. So tell me, how did you think about how you ordered that?
So it's an emotional journey. So it's kind of like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. There's peaks and valleys throughout it, where you go between like the visionary encouragement to the like hortatory conviction, and then kind of designed to get you down to the bare relationship you have with God. And I think a lot of folks think about their relationship with God in very theological or dogmatic or ideological ways. And the book is designed to kind of strip that back and look at it in very personal ways of saying you have a relationship, you have a friendship with the creator of the universe. How are you leveraging that?
Yeah.
And can you do that in a practical, tactical way? Or does it stay up in your worldview and up in your philosophies and up in your head? So kind of getting out of your head and into your heart.
What was this sounds callous, but I think you'll get it knowing me. What was the problem you were trying to solve in terms of how you formatted and worded it?
I would say that the underlying message of the book is that it's worth having a relationship with God. And especially in the world today, there's so many different obstacles. We live in a world where people are not unaware of Christianity. They're not unaware of Jesus, but they've been misinformed. And they've been given all sorts of lines that are everything from hateful and vitriolic to just plain inaccurate and functionally ineffective. We have a lot of Christian messages that are still pushing a dogmatic adherence rather than a thinking Christian approach. And so I tried to kind of work through the obstacles that people have between them and God and say, here's a way to address this one. Here's a way to get past that one. Like, look at the things that are challenging you. And I think one of the things people don't understand the most is that those obstacles are sin. And so one of the main messages in the book is re-exploring what sin really is. And I think a lot of people have been taught there's like the laundry list of the 613 precepts of Torah, and those are still the definition of sin. And the Bible lays out and says these are the things that separate you from God. But the definition of sin is not some sort of shame-ridden, guilt-ridden, like destruction of the individual. Instead, it's an empowerment saying, how do you get the obstacles out of the way between you and God so you can get his full spirit moving your life, his full understanding moving your mind, your heart excited and motivated to get up in the morning and have that healthy life. And the things that are standing between you and a healthy life are what God categorizes as sin.
Deeply relational. I hope this doesn't make you cry, but honestly, when I read it, I thought of two. I saw it as like a mashup of two of my favorite resources. One that has had probably one of the greatest impacts in the work with the C12 members that I work with, Buck Jacobs, The Most Important Hour, which is a straight journal. It's an abbreviated version of that, but something about that has been very powerful. But then I would mash it up with Blackaby's Experiencing God.
Oh my gosh.
Seriously, brother. Seriously. Yeah.
Mm.
So
that's a mad compliment. Wow.
And so here's what I know about Steve as well. Every time I've known you to have a book idea, there is one non-negotiable: don't pass go, don't collect $200. You know what I'm referring to? Before you get started, what do you always do before you start a new book?
Talk to God about it.
You talk to God. My recollection is you read through the
yes.
Bible.
Oh yes. I do that before I preach on Sunday.
Yes. The whole Bible every Sunday.
Pretty much.
Only takes 70 hours.
Yeah, it's not bad. People are like, you got to give the Holy Spirit room to move. And every time you read God's book, the Holy Spirit moves a different way, and you see things you didn't see before. It unlocks things that you wouldn't have understood before. And I still remember the very first time I read the Bible all the way through, just like a book. And so many people like get caught, and I think it's funny, when God wrote the book, He didn't put the chapters and verses in.
Right.
And I think that they're kind of an obstruction to people reading it like a chapter book. Mm-hmm. It's really not that long of a book. People read Harry Potter's in a weekend. They're much longer than the Bible. But I still remember the first time I read it was I was in college, and I had taken a Old Testament survey class, and I hadn't been ready for the final exam. It was a class where the entire grade is the final exam, and I'd been going, "Oh, I'll be fine. Got all the way to the end, the last weekend before the final exam, and I'm like, I'm not ready at all. So I just sat down and read the whole thing, and the craziest thing happened, because in reading it, all of a sudden I realized that God wasn't angry at Israel. And like, people have been telling this story like this angry God, that God the Father is going to come and punish and destroy and whatever. And instead, as you read it as a book, it unlocked this like awareness that God is patient and persistent and loving, and He always is welcoming them back. And they're running a field, and they're running amok, and they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff that should insult Him. That he even identifies as saying, "You know how insulting this is? Like, this is terrible what you're doing, and yet I want you back. So like, no matter where you go, I want you to come home." And I think that's the reason why I go back to the Bible over and over again, is because there's that like deep heart of God that's right there. And no matter how many different opinions are formed around the Bible and how many different questions are asked of it, I think when you look into it to discover the heart of God, you see it, that pulsing life force just coming for us, saying, "I want you home. I want you with me. Like,
come on, man.
Let's go."
What you just described somewhat explains Andy Stanley's stance on maybe suggesting that you put off reading the Old Testament until you understand. And I know there's a lot of debate around that. I don't want to go there, but it man, you do need to process what was really going on there. And in absence of that relationship, that can be hard. So I think, my experience is devotionals are incredibly powerful for busy people. And or people maybe who have drifted away from their faith. But given we were just talking about Bibles and reading Bibles, so after somebody would read the God Hour, I think it's pretty logical. I've found that they're like, "Hey, I want to jump back into the Bible," right? And I'm sure that's a hope that you have.
100%.
Yep.
My book is not as good as God's book.
Well, and Scripture is throughout, of course. But what do you have a favorite? There are so many now. A favorite translation?
I do. The original Greek and the original Hebrew.
How about something a little more approachable for us?
Sorry. So all the translations make mistakes. They make mistakes for different reasons. So it's kind of like the old school news outlets. As long as you knew their perspective, you could read through them and find. So I find it troubling when people are like, there's the authorized version, the King James version, and so they're the pure word of God, unadulterated. It's like, no, they're a translation into English, just like, so there's no English translation of the Bible that is 100% there, and part of that is because English doesn't do the things that Greek does. English doesn't do the things that English does, that Hebrew does. Excuse me.
Yep.
And so I love the New Living Translation. I think the story of it is phenomenal. It started as the Living Translation, and the guy had, I guess, seen the Good News Bible, and it just wasn't very accurate as a translation. And he knew the other translations out there, and he wanted a Bible that his kids could understand. And so every single day, coming home on the bus from work, he would translate enough to read his kids the Bible that night. And he wasn't a professional, he wasn't a scholar, whatever. And so the Living Translation had some scholarly issues to it, but it had this like heart of God just pulsing right through the pages, ethos to it that was trying to say what the Bible had said. And I love that, trying to say what the Bible had said. And the New Living Translation just brought some academic rigor to it and polished it up a little bit.
So is it a mix of literal and paraphrase?
I would say that it's an idiomatic translation to the best of its ability, and it will make idiomatic errors, just like any translation. But I find that the spirit of the word comes through it very, very clearly.
Yeah, love that. Everybody has a preference there. Man, however you get into it, right?
Right.
I'm hesitant to go here because I'll open a can of worms, but I'm just going to plant the seed maybe for later when we talk about AI. I do hear about people getting into using AI for the sake of re-engaging the Greek and the Hebrew.
Yeah. So
Are
if
you
you
a
think
proponent
about
of that?
yeah, so if you think about one of my first jobs that actually paid my way through seminary was writing computer assisted translation software, and back then storage was expensive. Back then processing power was expensive. So some of the things we can do today, we just literally couldn't do because the physical constraints of hardware wouldn't get us there.
Yeah.
But if you look at the fundamental, underlyings, AI is a whole bunch of different technologies, right? But the one that's the most famous, like the chatbot, is a large language model.
Yep.
And there are many things large language models are not good at doing.
Yep.
But one thing that they are very, very good at doing is taking a corpus, a linguistic corpus, a collection of language, and turning it into a vector database. And then being able to do rapid analysis, rapid summarization, rapid comparison through that corpus. So back in my day, it was called corpus linguistics, and we were doing all sorts of statistical analysis of texts because we didn't have the vector database linear algebra approaches that they have in modern, and trying to figure out if you could, we were looking at stemming and other ways to analyze the original language in order to figure out the parts of speech and then back that out into meaning. And what we figured out back then is it would be so much nicer if we could just tokenize the language and not have to semantically understand it. Because semantically parsing...
You were thinking Latin, about that back then?
Yeah.
Come on, man. That's kind of mind-blowing.
We were a little geeky. The problem was processing power just hadn't gotten there, so it wasn't that interesting. And as you got to larger and larger token collections, it just became impossible. But the idea is a good idea, and so there's nothing fundamentally wrong with taking analytical tools and good algorithms properly understood and using them in order to accelerate our ability. There's 6,315 living languages on Earth, and we do not have the Bible in all of them. Large language models should make the translation problem just go away, right? And so being able to get
Is that prophetic?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what we're watching, and this is the interesting biblical question, right, is does God want us to reverse the Tower of Babel? So we are. We've just invented technology that will reverse the Tower of Babel and is in process of doing so right now. And I can take the same algorithms and apply it to a Chinese text that I can't read a word of and derive, semantic meaning out of. I can do it to French, German, Greek, whatever. And I think it's definitely a valid algorithmic approach to helping understand. One of the things that people discount or rely on is we look at all the human scholars who have looked at Greek and the lexicons have been built and whatever as if they're authoritative. And regularly I'll discover in my own study, if I'm a native English speaker and I have a word, there might be homophones and other things that are slightly different words, but those words carry a kind of a bandwidth of meaning, right? And we understand the spectrum as a native speaker of that word. Yeah. And oftentimes lexicons hedge or break or fracture a word as if they're multiple words.
Give us an example.
I love the word Ganosko in Greek. So Ganosko is the know. And we don't like the fact that Ganosko is the know like being known biblically, right? It is an intimate, physical unit. And that's the knowledge when Jesus is telling the parable of the wedding feast where the doors are closed and the guests come afterwards and they're like, get away. Yeah. I never Ganoskoed you. And so the standard that he's holding all the way through Scripture backs up the fact that he's talking about an intimate, meaningful, personal, knowing, like full naked relationship with someone. Yep. And instead, we want to back it out and be, well, something else. Yeah. And the question is, are you known by God? God throughout Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, all the way through, compares us to His bride, right? Men, women alike, we're all the bride of God. And I think of like in Revelation, it talks about the holy city adorned like a bride adorned for her husband. Mm-hmm. How is that? How is a bride adorned for her husband? What's the clothes that a wife wears in the presence of her husband alone? Mm-hmm. Nothing. Mm-hmm. Right? The relationship that God's looking for is a deeply intimate, fully naked, full transparency relationship. Yeah. Where we're not holding anything back, we're not putting on, and look at Matthew 23, where the sin, I always ask this question, the sin that Jesus hates the most, he actually gets like visibly mad to the point of like spitting, losing words, running out of vocabulary to say how upset he is about it. And what is that sin, right? And people are always like, I don't know, like homosexuality or sexual sin or sexual immorality, I don't know, something like that, right? And you're like, no, hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. And why is hypocrisy the one that gets him the most upset, right? Sons of vipers, what's going to protect you from the wrath to come? Mm-hmm. It's because it is the greatest obstruction between you and him. If you can't even be honest with yourself about who you are and where you're at and what's happening for you, like, what are you doing?
So thank you for that. That was a really, really good example, because I know most of our listeners will understand that God is omniscient, omnipotent, and yet, and so to say that he doesn't know us, like that doesn't maybe register, but you unpacked that well. I want to come back to that, but let me kind of round out our conversation about the book. And I am curious, because you wrote the book really as a journaling exercise. I'm curious how much it changed over time, and if at any point, like that journey, you were really challenged in your own either spiritual walk or as a leader.
All the way through. I think, man, that's a tough question. I grew up through some pretty tough things, and I think one of the things that the devil does is tells me that I need to compare my trauma and my baggage and my garbage with yours. And I think that leads to Christians driving people out of churches over the baggage they see that seems like it's worse than their baggage. It drives hypocrisy in the church because we want to look like we don't have baggage that other people might judge. I think that one of the things that I've kind of learned is every single human life is a fight for their life between God and the powers of darkness. We're the battlefield. And if you've read Sun Tzu's Art of War, you know that the battlefield determines the victory, right? Waterloo was lost before Napoleon walked on the field. He just didn't know it. And so you win by choosing the battlefield. And so when Jesus tells the story of the sower, right, he doesn't tell the story as us as the farmer. He doesn't tell us the story as us as the seed. We're the ground, right? And we get to choose the entire outcome of God's work on earth is how good ground are we? And so when we look at each other, that's what we're supposed to be like seeing is an opportunity to build up, to fertilize, to water, to support, to till, to amplify, to whatever it is. And those comparisons where like we look at our circumstance, our situation, or we look at the decisions we've made or the things that have happened to us, and want to say, well, it's harder for me than it is for you. It's not. And whether you might look at someone else and say, well, I'd rather have their trauma, or I'd rather have their background, I'd rather have, you look at Jesus and wealth, right? And he basically says, disregard it as a meaningful impact. I can multiply wealth so much, it doesn't matter what you start with, you're going to end just fine, right? So instead of sitting there in jealousy and apathy and anger and division, see it as a resource and invest that resource where you have it. And if you have 1 talent, or you have 5 talents, you have 10 talents, I'm going to multiply it to double that, to triple that, to 10 times that, to 100 times that. So you're going to be fine. Compounding interest is going to win every time. The question is, can you have the perspective in the moment to say, what do I actually have? What are the gifts that God actually gave me? And how is God calling me to invest them?
Yep.
So that's...
How do you think, or how would you suggest somebody think about navigating, processing, discerning their calling?
Yeah, so I'm really bad at this. So God told me to write a book in 2003, and I just released it this year in March. And And so if there's one of the most challenging aspects of my walk with God, it's me telling God what I think and thinking that really matters. And going to him and being like, all right, so I figured it all out, and here's your plan, and here's the way, and here's the thing it's going to do, and this is what I need to do right now, and you don't understand the risk to that, so I'm not going to do that because that doesn't make sense, and this would be a little awkward, so I'm going to do this instead, and it's going to work out better, and it never does. And so the God hours is kind of the outcome of that. Let's turn the perspective around. I love when we think about what we bring to our relationship to God. Where do we put it? One of my very favorite jokes is the guy who's driving, and you can put him wherever you want, downtown Baltimore where the parking's terrible. And he's got a meeting. He's starting to run late for the meeting. He can't find parking. And so finally, in desperation, after he's about to lose his job over whatever, he's like, God, please get me a parking spot. And then as he finishes his prayer, a car pulls out right in front of him. There's a parking spot. He pulls in, and as he pulls in, he's like, never mind, God, I found one.
Classic us.
That's us all the way. And I feel like that's the heartbeat of my life, right? Of saying, like, I'm going to come up with something really great. I'm going to invent something really great. I'm going to propose something really great. And God's going to bless me because I offered something that added to the value of his kingdom. And that's completely backwards. You can't do it. Everything we have is a gift. And the sooner we see that, and I think of like the struggle so many people have in body image as an example, right? The Bible tells us the body is the temple of God. And I have a very resplendent temple of God. And people look at that and go, oh, don't follow that guy. He's terrible at following God. Look at his temple. And I might look in the mirror in the morning and say, my temple is not up to snuff, or I could be a little this or a little that. And I might compare temples with somebody else. The question is, can you realize that you were created with intention, with design, with intelligence, with passion, with plan, with purpose, and you are perfectly suited for the mission God has for you today? And so what is that? And I think it's important to know that God doesn't speak into the head. And so people who are looking for the kind of voices in the head experience end up getting misled pretty easily because there's somebody else who does love speaking to the head, and it's not God. But instead, God calls on the heart. And I love the fact we have just as many epithelial cells like in our guts as we have in our brains, apparently, because our thinking capacity is a much more full body experience. And I think God moves in ways where we know, and he's looking for that no. And so when we're looking for what we're really called to do, I love Mike Rowe, talking about like, look where there's demand in the marketplace rather than like what you feel like you have your dreams about. But I think it's more than that. I think there is an actual living God who is actually, speaking a promise over your life and saying, this is who I made you to be. And for God, it's always a matter of identity, right? Like when you think about what does being born again mean? He says, I'm going to give you a new identity. I'm going to give you a new name. That's the name that he created you to have. And it's the tragedy is there's many, many people who never come into that identity, never get the peace, the joy, the fulfillment, the satisfaction of living the mission and the calling and the identity that God gives them. And so I think I see finding your calling more as quieting the noise, like get out of your head, get out of your planning mode, get out of your need to know and your need to determine and your need to understand all the implications, and get down into that real place of who am I, what satisfies me, what fulfills me, what am I excited about today.
And that's really the psychology, the Aikido behind the God Hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
Short, quick read that hopefully slows us down, questions that slow us down even a little further, point us upward, right, in our thinking. I think that's why they're so effective. I want to come back to something I think is really big here. So, Steve, I don't think I told you this before, but when I was thinking about my plans for the year and this idea of Leaders on Tap came about, really, the idea wasn't Leaders on Tap. What God gave me overwhelmingly as I was going through the Bible and in between Christmas and New Year's, just looking at my plans and then, kind of like, Lord, speak into that, was this idea of made for more. And in my work with Christian business leaders like yourself, it is consistent. It is an asset and a liability, right? And so this tension that you just described, your own confession about, I'm going to pursue this thing. I feel like God's calling me in this direction, but then I'm going to go pursue it, so that I can add something to the kingdom. Is that a mistake? Is that a tension we need to live with? Is it like being attracted to somebody? It's like some of that's wired, but of course it can be a sin if we take it to a sinful place. Any reflection on that?
So there's a idea in psychology called the Gestalt. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it impacts everything from like our visual acuity to the way we think about things. Which is the brains are great pattern matchers, and they love seeing a pattern. They love closing and figuring out the pattern, right? We like puzzle solving. We like
stories, whatever. Yep.
But there's a risk in that is kind of a fundamental human flaw, which is that when we see something where there isn't a pattern, we will superimpose a pattern, and sometimes that's cool. We do like fractals in order to fill in gaps in photography. Because we figured out a way where you have a gap, you have two pixels, you don't know what to put between them, and there's mathematics you can use in order to calculate what should go between it. It creates these amazing images. The question is, what actually belongs there, right? And so what I find is that God creates dynamic tension between you and your calling. And I think of the children of Israel sitting on the edge of the Red Sea. And what's God's first command? It's the most irrational, illogical, crazy, you've got to be kidding command, maybe in the Bible. You have the most powerful army in the ancient world bearing down on them with chariots when they have no weapons of war other than like a couple swords and shields with them. They're sitting on a beach that's completely defenseless, backed up to the water, with a pillar of fire and cloud behind them that's supposed to protect them. And God tells them to stand still. So that's the Gestalt problem. So if you come to the gap and you invent the solution, right? And I feel like Indiana Jones did a great disservice to us all when he got to the Bridge of Faith in I think his Last Crusade, and he threw dirt on it. And he's misled an entire generation into trying to fill the gap. And we shouldn't be. We should be resting in God. And the idea throughout Scripture is this idea of rest, of I know that God's plan is for me. I know that God's judgment is for me. I know that God's love is for me. I know that what is about to happen is going to be better than what I could do. And so until I truly know that next step, Indiana Jones' feet stood on the edge of that chasm. I am absolutely certain he, maybe nobody else, but he would have seen the bridge and he could have walked across it because that's how faith works. Right? You stand on the edge until you see the bridge, and then you walk across the bridge. It's not we're walking a bridge we don't see. It's we're walking a bridge that other people may not see.
Yeah. This reminds me of, to the extent that you're comfortable going here, a high point, low point in our personal walk together, where you had done a deep dive on your business and your ministry, and then you and I met afterwards for our one-on-one, and I don't even think it was of me, brother, to be honest. But I said some challenging words to you that years later you would say, wow, like I remembered that had an impact. Do you mind sharing that? Do you remember what I'm talking about? But it was this idea that you were in navigating this tension that you're describing, there were just so many wonderful things, so many wonderful ways and opportunities that God was bringing before you. And yet, in your high capacity and intellectual wiredness, you were kind of hedging your bets on God.
I always do that. Yeah, that's a bad flaw of mine.
You received it well. You received it well. I was nervous. I feel like that was the toughest love I've ever delivered to somebody.
Yeah.
But I just want to name it because it's not just you, brother.
Yeah.
Like almost everybody that I work with is navigating that. And I think to call it bad is to ignore, I think, some of how God's wired it. God has wired us for more, right? We just have a misplaced notion of what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that is. This reminds me of the closing scene of Jerry Maguire when he's on the interview and he's like, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. And of course he ends up crying.
Yeah.
Love that movie. But so I think one of the interesting challenges of being educated and being intelligent and generally being a high functioning person is that we can lose our center. And I think it's really encouraged by the world to do. So we're praised, we're lauded, we're approved, we're accepted to the degree that we aren't worried about our center, we're worried about our performance. And I think the hedge is trying to hold on to the world. And like I said, if there's a journey that is the heartbeat of that book is written to me. And every time I edited it, I'd end up weeping at the end. I was like, I can't read this book again. This is terrible. Because it's so convicting and so challenging to I see so clearly where God has prepared a place for me. And then I see my unwillingness to go there and offer him anything else in exchange. And there are all the hedges to the left and to the right of, this way and that way and the other way. And couldn't we do it this way? And wouldn't I still get there if I did this?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that will help a lot of people. And I'm going to take it a little further. So that was around the same time that I think you were coming to realization that the trauma in your younger years and maybe even young adult years were not to be compartmentalized from the ministry and mission that God has given you. You want to go there?
Sure, let's go there. Yeah, yeah. So
you leaned into it.
I did lean into it, and I have. I am leaning into it right now. It is the toughest walk of my life, hands down, no competition. And it's realizing that God made me, and there's an identity that he's giving me, and it's moving at whatever pace I'm able to move it, and he's able to draw it. And it's so there's 5 basic trauma responses, all of which are dysfunctional in their own way, but all of which can be a path to survival. We got famous fight or flight, freeze, flop, and fawn. The crazy thing about survival is you get survival bias based on whatever method you chose to make it through your trauma.
That time.
And I think every human life, I like to point out, I do believe that trauma is just a modern word for sin. And if you understand that, you understand how the church should be dealing with sin as opposed to how it often does deal with sin.
Interesting.
It literally breaks the heart of God, right? Disobedience doesn't literally break the heart of God. His child being hurt, being harmed, being abused, that breaks the heart of God. And that heartbreak we see, Jesus literally weeping at on his way into Jerusalem the final time because of there is this kind of surface story of he knows people aren't going to believe him, aren't going to understand him, right? If you've seen The Last Temptation of Christ, which famously kind of explored him saying, well, why don't I just come down off the cross and go marry Magdalene and have a nice life? Like, what an idea. I feel like that was a cool challenge because it was like, what was the last temptation of Christ? What was the story of Christ? And it was the Bible says no weapon formed against you is going to succeed. Not that no weapon is going to be formed against you, but that none of them are going to succeed. And in my healing journey with trauma, what I've discovered is when we say Jesus paid for our sins, it makes it a very transactional kind of monetary statement. Our debts and our sins, and kind of it's a very monetary thing. He went to the banker and he gave him some money.
Right.
But Isaiah says it's by his wounds we are healed. And so it took me a lot to kind of resolve my inner conflict with God over what had happened to me. Kind of the classic, where were you and why'd you let this happen? And I think that the moment of realization, I was doing EMDR therapy, which if you haven't tried it is...
I hear it's amazing.
Amazing. I highly recommend it.
It's wild. A wonder of God's design.
Right? It's just figuring out how the brain actually works.
Yep.
And I was doing it with a Christian therapist, which I highly recommend, because in the EMDR session, I was working on my relationship with Christ, because we have some arguments and some disagreements about some things. I got this image, vision, whatever you want to say. EMDR is kind of a weird dreamlike sort of experience, but of like me standing next to Christ, kind of in a classic, footprints in the sand poem kind of way, and feeling like he couldn't get to me. And then Christ saying, "No, let me just show you something. Can I show you something? Are you good? For you, we'll do it." And he just folded in. And he's like, every single thing that happened to you happened to me. I took it all. I was there with you, taking it every single step of the way. I'm like, I am so sorry. Like, I made you have like terrible, awful things in your life. He's like, what do you think it meant when I got on the cross to show you how much I love you? Like, I will take everything the enemy has done, all of it, the gross parts, the disgusting parts, the vile and foul and things you can't mention parts. I was there with you, not just watching you, not just like holding your hand on the sideline. I was taking the same hit with you.
How has that realization, very personal, how has that impacted your leadership in a for-profit business versus in the church?
So I stopped pretending to be somebody else. And I think I spent 40 plus years of my life trying to fit in, trying to perform well enough to be approved, to be accepted, to be something that I wasn't, trying to make all the decisions so that I would look like and read like something that I wasn't, and never really getting relationships or friendships or the impact that I wanted. And even when I was successful, it was shallow, because it wasn't me. People didn't want me there. They wanted whatever this thing was that I was trying to do. And I think realizing that the person that Jesus saved was me. And what the enemy does to so many people, if not all people, is at some point in your life, the enemy convinces you to leave you behind, to abandon you. And that's the worst wound of all, and that's the sin of hypocrisy. Where did God stop having a hold on you? And that's where the enemy broke you. And so going back to that and saying, I don't want there to be anything between...
Any daylight between,
yeah. And so whoever God made him be,
I'm going to lean into that.
It's good enough. I'm going to lean into that. Let's go. I actually sat down my entire staff and told them my story. They were like, "Oh my God!" And then I was like, we lost some clients over it. And I'm like, but I'm gonna go win as me, or I'm gonna go fail as me. But one way or the other, I'm going back. I'm getting me, and I'm carrying that forward. And so that new identity, that born again identity, actually is who you really are. It's not like there's a different person waiting for you. It's God saying, can I give you a little clarity for a minute? This is who you were made to be. This is the impact you're going to have. And it gives a much more meaningful fulfillment to the work that you do every day when you can show up.
How do your employees interact with you now? How would you say, obviously with something like that, there's going to be an initial shock factor.
Yeah.
How would you describe it now?
I think there's so much more compassion in the workplace. I think there's so much more like grace and celebration. It kind of is freeing to realize that I want them there, just like I'm willing to show up. I want them there, and wherever they're coming from, whatever mess they're in, whatever struggle they're going through, like we're in it together, and that's a really powerful thing. And there are people where that's like maybe too intimate for a professional work environment, and that so it's uncomfortable. And there's other people that are excited to finally find a work environment where they can just show up as them, and they're having a bad day. They don't have to pretend that they're sick and call up and say, well, whatever, and then there's no lies, there's no deception. It's just this is where I'm at and this is what I need, and let's see what we can do to support each other to get through and accomplish the mission.
One of my favorite corporate videos is Chick-fil-A's video that has basically like pop-up stories as they pan around a restaurant. So there's an old, single old lady sitting by herself who just lost her husband. There's somebody, young person who just didn't get accepted into, or did get accepted into the college. And what I love about it is they don't just focus on the customers. At some point, like the cashier is part of that. And you're like, everybody has a story. And I just think about the empathy that created, how that probably shaped culture. I will tell you as part of my story, similar to yours, the hands down, I think, best decision I ever made as a parent was when my kids were old enough to process parts of my past that I just felt like they needed to know. And this was probably middle school going into high school, I would say. And I just shared it with them. Yeah. And I think whether we're parents or leaders, it's kind of wonderful how this conversation is actually shaping. But, as leaders especially, we get elevated, right? And there's these expectations, and somehow we leave ourselves behind. And in doing so, we leave the humanity and the impact of our God-given dignity, right? That really, we talk about this idea of business as a ministry all the time, right?
Yeah.
Let's start with how we show up.
Yeah.
Right? Like our full selves. Because, by the way, that's what God wants for us, and that's our best. And that's how we help other people realize God's best for them, right?
Yeah.
How about your ministry? There was a pretty dramatic swing there where like that was the focus. Now it seems like you're a little bit more on center, but you're unapologetic about, hey, we are a community for people that have gone through these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a challenging thing to look at. I'm a gay conservative Christian Bible believing follower of Jesus Christ married to a straight girl. And you look at that set of labels and you go, oh, you're going to offend everybody. And I'm like, yeah, I pretty much offend everybody. There's a reason to leave me from whatever side of the aisle you come from. I believe the Bible actually means what it says, and it's as written, it's true, word for word all the way through. And there's very, very clear statements around, in the beginning, God created man and woman. And for that reason, a man should leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife alone. And I think I've discovered more blessings in following God. I like to say, although I'm pretty bad at making decisions, I made two noteworthy decisions that God called me to that have been the greatest source of blessing in my life. One was I said yes when I met Galadriel, and all the I was in love with somebody else at the time. I was pursuing somebody else to prove that I was straight at the time. Like it was one of the most messed up situations ever. And I was just walking down to a thrift shop and walking across a football field, and there's this girl sitting and babysitting her little siblings on a playground as I walked by, and she just turned my head, and a girl had never turned my head before, and I was like, "Who is that?" And I walked over and I introduced myself. And we met, and as they say, the rest is history. But how does God use that? Well, so that's the at the end of the day, if you look at the Bible says we choose who we love. The end, right? Your fundamental choice is whether or not you love God and want to be a part of His family or not. The people you serve and the people you work with, you're choosing every day. And I think Disney did a great disservice when they said that somehow hormones and pheromones and chemistry and biology somehow supersede the fundamental human call and human need for intimacy. And actual intimacy is a choice. Actual intimacy is showing up. It's a focus. It's a presence. It's an intention. And you can do that with anybody. And when you do that in the workplace, you get what Simon Sinek would call the why, right? I mean, you look at Steve Jobs. Was he a holy and righteous man with no sins and no flaws? And no, he was pretty clearly like just a mess going somewhere to happen. But he could get that clear presence and that clear focus that people who like, I know why I'm here. I'm not here because Steve Jobs is a brilliant this, that, the other thing. I'm here because I want to be a part of this. And that presence, that focus is a choice, and it's choosing to love. And I think that every blessing in my life has come out of that. I got 5 kids that are all amazing, incredible human beings, and each one of those is I don't get to determine who they are. I don't get to decide their identity. I don't get to decide their life path. I can't even defend them from all of the things that are going to come against them in this life. But I do get to choose to love them.
So how old were you when you came to the point of kind of leaning into that trauma, and do you associate your sexual orientation with that trauma?
So
I realize some of this stuff might be over our pay grade.
No, it's a great question. My trauma is I have one living memory before I had life-altering experiences. I was standing outside. It was a beautiful day. I remember the sun shining, blue sky, green grass. There's like a tree off here to the side and some clouds skeeting through
very clear.
And my memory of that, the way my brain registered that was my last good day. And I was like 4. So I don't have any living memories. People are always talking about going back to what they lost in trauma. I don't have any living memory of before it. I don't have anything to go back to. So I have no way of knowing. People are like, were you born gay? I'm like, in my experience, I have no experience of not being. And you will not find someone who tried harder to be straight than me. I don't know, growing up as a gay kid in the 70s and 80s, not the same as growing up as a gay kid today. There were playground games that I just knew people were coming for me, and that was just the excuse. I was bullied incessantly all the way through elementary and middle school.
Let me pull it up a little bit in a way that make it a little less personal, but maybe actually more relevant for the listener. The focus that I saw you take your church to was around trauma and sexual dysphoria.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So that seems to imply a linkage to those two.
People ask me all the time, can you be gay and be Christian? And I'm like, all I know is that God saved me. All I know is that Jesus died for me. All I know is that every single one of my sins, no matter how big they are, He can handle and He paid for. And I know that He wants me. And I know that He wants me to be close to Him. And I know He wants to get rid of all the obstacles that are between us. And what His order of operations is on what things He's going to change, when He's going to change it. When I came to Christ in 96, I was suicidal. I've never had a suicidal ideation thought since being saved. So 1996, in May of 96, I set that down with accepting Christ, and it was gone. So I know He's capable of doing that. So the question then always comes, well, what about all your other sins, right? You're still a sinful, flawed human being. Why didn't you remove all those other ones if He's got the power?
Yeah.
Right? Those are my arguments with God.
But I and thank you for sharing that. But I sensed in the nail polish that you wear as part of that, you're trying to bring awareness to it feels like both trauma and the sexual
Wages.
identity confusion and dysphoria. Am I saying that right?
Everybody's going to tell you said it wrong from both sides.
Okay.
There's no right way to say it. So
I think of it. I'm not.
It's a
trying.
perfectly valid way to say it. There's a lot of weight in it
in one way or another
of,
are sexually confused with regard to their identity.
I don't like being called confused. I'm not confused about my identity. I've experienced it for 40-something years. There are people who are still confused, usually younger people.
Okay.
And it's like I don't like people who are like, I struggle with same-sex attraction. I don't struggle with it. It just is who I am. So I have full agency. I have the ability to make decisions and live my life however I want to live my life. And I think it's important to realize that you can pursue God from your context, just like I can pursue God from my context. And I think that message has been lost in the church of there's this idea of get yourself right and then come to church, or clean yourself up and then come to church.
Yeah.
And we kind of had a movement in for a while there in the 70s of saying the church is a hospital for sinners, not a whatever. And it sort of got there, but then you kind of get the nice patronizing, like, oh, well, we have this collection of sinners that we look over and we care for. And so we have compassion for these poor sinners. Yeah. But the real members of the church, the real ministers of God, the real leaders, like, so we wouldn't want one of those sinners, like, playing a guitar on the stage. Like, heaven help us if we had a guitar player that was struggling with sexual sin. And I can see that. There's some famous cases of people getting pretty deep into sexual sin because nobody could help them, and falling out of ministry because of it.
And that's where I was trying to go. So you are trying to create a community, especially as a conservative.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And in the evangelical, I don't even know if you consider yourself evangelical, but in the evangelical realms, where so many times we put quotation marks around these things, right? And they're not allowed inside the bubble, if you will, right? And you're saying, no, you're fully welcome here.
Fully welcome.
How has that played out in terms of your leadership in the church?
So, like I said, I think that it's an interesting walk to kind of see the whole Bible as it is written. And I'm unwilling to walk away from any statement that God put in there. And I don't think any of them are a mistake. And I loathe the people who are like, I'm welcoming because I just disregard. The Bible didn't really mean this. The Bible didn't really mean that. It really was talking about it. And because of that, it's a very challenging position to have in the gay community, because the Bible does say that it's an abomination. The Bible does say that a man shall not lie with a man as he does with a woman, and a woman shall not lie with a woman like she does with a man, right? It's very explicit, and you can't get around it. And people are like, well, if you look at it's talking about pederasty, or it's talking about this, or talking about that. I'm like, if you look at the whole ilk of the Bible, the message of God is that the blessings that he has for the human race that go back to creation are for one man and one woman to get together. And they also get this wrong, and this is another one we can debunk while we're at it, is when a man and woman become one flesh, it's not some sort of weird mystical union between their biology. It's literally the creation of children. So the one flesh that results from a man and woman getting together is biological procreation. And so God is saying, I want the sustainment and the growth and the survival of the human race. And I created it to sustain itself. I created it to continue and to multiply. And his first command in the Bible, the prime requisite requirement, the first thing God says, he creates us. And then the very first thing he says, the very first command he ever gives us is go out there and get it on. And yeah, be fruitful, multiply, right? But sex is literally the first command. And so it's fundamental to the human experience. It's one of the deepest human needs. And when you look at the experience and the spectrum of human sexuality, and then you talk to people, which I've done my whole life, one of my like pocket polls I've run since I was little is saying, have all of your sexual experiences been good? And I have yet to find a single human being who ever said yes. Right? We all have this wild, messy ride, right? And it's supposed to be this prime offering from God, this like the centerpiece of the very first command he ever gave us, this incredible blessing where we end up with all the beauty of having a family and having a place to belong and having a home and like all sorts of things supposed to come out of that. How many people do you know who are in heterosexual marriages that are cold, sad, depressing, abusive, like
just watch Netflix,
right? I mean, oh my word, right? So the spectrum of sexual sin is enormous.
Hey, what I feel like I hear you saying, Steve, is that you're experiencing a lot of people who are connecting with you on what you have gone through, but maybe still a hesitancy to engage with the church.
Yeah.
Openly there.
Very strongly.
What would you recommend to the church?
What I would recommend to the church is stop with the false dichotomy. So we have a dichotomy in the church where the conservatives try to beat sin out of the church with a stick, and the liberals try to say the Bible doesn't have a problem with sin. And that's a false dichotomy. They're both wrong. They're equally wrong. And the actual conservative position is to say that God is not afraid of our sin. God is not surprised by our sin. God is perfectly aware of all the weapons the enemy is forming, and he says none of them are going to win. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. He proved that by coming to earth to get his hands dirty, right? He got his hands dirty with some nails, like remember? And so what the church needs to do is not shy away from the truth of the Bible, not try to reinterpret or misinterpret or compromise the validity of the Bible as written, but instead to show that the Bible as written has a God that is personally, deeply invested in every single human being created and is looking for that story arc to bring them home to himself, to give them peace, to give them fulfillment, to give them satisfaction. And that's going to be messy. In the same way, like you wouldn't expect somebody who's learning algebra to solve the most complex equations on day one. And yet we look at our own like spiritual walk and we're surprised when we aren't pure, righteous, and holy and flawless without, like Noah in our generation. And I like to point out, it did say that Noah was righteous in his generation, and the man got drunk and naked afterwards because he got depressed. So like there's no character in the Bible other than Jesus that's perfect. No character in the Bible that like we look to as an example and go, I want to be like Joseph. Joseph, who actually set up all the policies that enslaved the children of Israel. Yeah. Right? Like
David's a great example.
David's a great example, right? And David was a man after God's own heart. Why? Right? He was a great sinner, like all the way through. Why was he such like a man after God's own heart? Because David wanted a relationship with God more than anything else. And no matter what mess he made of himself, and no matter what sin he committed, no matter what he'd done yesterday, he was showing up and saying, God, I get it. I'm stupid. I'm wrong. Like, I want a relationship with you. Help me get through this so I can get back to my relationship with you because I'm the one who broke it. And I think about Jesus talking about the two people praying in the street, right? And how many Christians are trying to be the one saying, I'm so glad I'm not like that guy over there. Yeah. Right? And Jesus is like, that guy doesn't go home justified. The guy who goes home justified is the guy who's like, well, here we are, and this is the facts of my life, and this is who I am, this is where I'm coming from, and it's kind of miserable and kind of stupid and kind of bad, but I could really use your help, man. And that guy goes home to the house justified. Here I am, I'm a sinner. Do we think it's somehow because we were born again, somehow because we chose a relationship with Christ, somehow because we're attending church or reading the Bible, that we're no longer in a fight for our lives with the devil? No, of course you're in a fight for your life.
So let's round out this part of our conversation. If you could share with us the children's book that you wrote, and what was the catalyst for that, and what do you hope comes from that?
So that's also why I paint my nails, to raise awareness for. It's called the RingFingerChallenge, #RingFingerChallenge. I encourage you to look it up. It's for the Bloom Safe, which is an act I'm trying to get passed through Congress. Bloom Safe, make America the safest place to be a kid. And it's the origin of that is that depending on whose statistics you count, if you look at the formal statistics from the CDC, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys. If you look at other sources, it can be as it was 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys, or as bad as 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be victim of sexual violence before they're age 18 in America today. What that means is that of all the babies born this year, unless we do something, 400,000 of the babies born every year will be sexually abused before they get to the age of majority. Right now, according to FBI crime statistics, about 66% of all victims of sexual assault are younger than 18. The most likely age to be raped in America is 14. The second most likely age to be raped in America is 4. So with numbers like that, you would think that this is a epidemic that Congress would be talking about, that every state would be talking about, that every school and church would be talking about, and yet we're not. We've been walking by it for generations, and it's a problem as old as time. You can read Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire to see that people were doing the exact same thing in Rome as they're doing today. It's nothing new, but the question is, why hasn't the church risen up? Why hasn't America risen up? It's the greatest violation of human rights in America today. And if you look once again at the FBI crime stats, you'll see that the FBI reports that it's one of the most underreported crimes. Most victims don't report until they're 52, and because of that, charges often aren't brought. Even of the ones where charges are brought, we only have about a 14% conviction rate. Put that all together, and the total number of people incarcerated for perpetrating sexual crimes against children is 0.26% of the estimated total population of perpetrators. So when we go to protect our children in schools and churches, whatever, by doing a federal background check, that federal background check is ineffective 99.74% of the time. We don't know. And so this book is written to raise awareness and to teach some of the behaviors that can make adults into safe adults. And part of that is developing good communication skills with children. Part of that is teaching children the scientific, medically accurate names of their body parts. Being a safe adult, be someone that a child can come to if they have concern or if they're worried. Be someone where that kid's not going to get in trouble for telling the truth. There's any number of reasons why children don't disclose that they've experienced abuse. And so as adults, we need to intentionally take it as a calling to become educated, to understand what the red flags are for both perpetrators and groomers that are trying to become perpetrators, and for children who are experiencing abuse that may not be able to tell you.
So I'm curious, as a new grandfather, I'm reliving children's books right now, wonderfully so, and I'm realizing again, or being reminded, how many of them have this dual audience, right? Like it's written for the kid, but just like Bug's Life or whatever, right? But it's really for us adults. And so I'm curious, is any of that behind your thinking here?
So I wrote it to fill a niche. So it's a rhyming book, kind of like Dr. Seuss. It's got so it's a rhyming body safety book. And so there's the story for the kid that's telling them that their body is theirs and that it's a smart choice to make decisions about that, and that means they have the right to say no, and that the adults in their life should support them in saying no if they don't want to do something. And that could be as easy as, I don't want to kiss grandpa, I don't want to sit in Santa's lap, I don't want to show physical affection in this scenario. Like, we aren't going to coerce our children into using their bodies in ways that make them uncomfortable. And that's a good lesson to teach. And I opened up with a quote from Corinthians about the body being a gift from God. And so as Christians, oftentimes we get very uncomfortable around talking about sexual topics or talking about body autonomy or things that sound like they might be something other than biblical, but it's very biblical. Going back to this is a gift, and it was given to you, right? And it's for your enjoyment. It's for your
is that part of this
fulfillment? Yeah, that's in there.
Right on.
And then I wrote a pretty material afterward to give kind of a starting point for adults who want to get informed. And so one of the things that's interesting is I've met mandatory reporters who don't know they're mandatory reporters. Right? So if you're a teacher in a school and you see evidence of abuse happening to one of your students, you're a mandatory reporter. You're supposed to be reporting that to the authorities so the Child Protective Services can get out and protect that kid. And so
youth leader, Sunday school teacher, 100%, right?
So it's just a starting point. It's not a comprehensive textbook, but there's some initial things. So one of the things that's carried forward for a long time is stranger danger, and we think we're going to defend our kids by stranger danger, and don't get into creepy vans with creepy men. And the statistics, the reality is that 93% of all perpetrators are known to the child at the time of the abuse. And over 50% of them are family or close relative.
Hey, I'm going to switch gears on you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that. Let's talk about business now.
Let's talk about business. Like selling this book right here. You can get it on Amazon right now.
I was going to ask you, where can you get both of them on Amazon?
Both of them on Amazon,
yeah. Right on.
Sorry for the plug.
That's okay. That's great. Yeah. And let's name them out loud, too, so we get them in the transcript. So it's the God Hour and My Body is for Myself. Steve, your tech company is called Restyn. Mm-hmm. Tell everybody a little bit about Restyn and what you guys do, and a little bit that evolution, which you were describing to me, is really from a crossing the chasm right now from services to product.
Yeah. So Restyn has two kind of pillars. One is our mission, which is bless, and it's an acronym, and it's a self-referencing acronym because I'm a geek. So you got to have a self-referencing acronym. So bless is to bless, love, empower, serve, and safeguard the relationships in our lives. And that's the heartbeat of what we do. That's why we get up in the morning. That's why we get together and work as a team. And we want to bring that into the algorithms we develop. We want to bring that into the technology platforms we deliver. We want to bring that into the customer service we provide, like every aspect: bless, love, empower, serve, and safeguard. And then our motto is the future is human. And this is the pivot that we're watching right now. It's surprising to me that it's kind of become the differentiating factor for us. But in a world that is racing to replace humans in every way, shape, and form, and have a creative destruction of the economy, we want to look at the human impact and realize that the only things of value are human. The only, our customers are human, our team members are human, any impact or legacy you're going to have is human. The measures of success, companies become, your KPIs determine who you are, right? You determine your identity. What you measure is what you become. And so we want to make sure that the KPIs that we're measuring and we're valuing are the human KPIs.
Tell me about those. I love that.
So if you think about understanding technology, the other book that I haven't read yet, haven't finished yet, but I'm working on, is one looking at algorithms in the context of the impact they have in an organization. And so when we get things wrong, it's because we have an algorithm that's misaligned to the human process or misaligned to the human need. And we do it all the time. And sometimes it's because we aren't creative or innovative enough in order to create technology that could do something, and so we're just waiting 20 years till somebody figures it out or whatever. But sometimes we get a new technology, and I think of one of my favorite examples is the message queue, right? It was a really hard problem to solve for a very long time, and computing wasn't very good at queuing. And then we solve it right around the turn of the century, and all of a sudden you see the birth of social media. And social media is somebody saying, well, I have a message queue. You know what I can do with that? I could put little messages on it that people would consume. What a great idea, right? And so we all need a feed, and we're all going to have a feed. And then everybody had their software. I'm pretty sure Facebook started without a feed and then got a feed. PHP was not a great language for doing feeds, so they had to get a different heartbeat in there in order to get it to be able to serve a feed. Java way better at it, so that's I think what they used. But you look at that and you go, when you're a hammer, all the world is nails.
Yep.
And we often do that, not really considering what the human impact is. And we're watching that right now with AI, where people are like, "Ooh, a new algorithm! I'm going to hit everything with it." And I've heard executives literally tell me, "We're just trying to adopt AI in every way possible." I'm like, "Have you thought about that just for a moment? What is the outcome? What is the end game? What is the result of that? Why are you a business in the first place, right?" And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. You can think you have a better view of the market than your customer, and so you're going to come and you're going to disrupt the market by giving them something they didn't know they could have, or whatever it is. But if you aren't evaluating the decisions you're making based on the human impact, I think you're going to end up with having negative outcome. And so right now, if you look at social media as a whole and the feed economy that came out of that, we're discovering that the human impacts to that are terrible. The algorithms are very addictive. They aren't producing great mental health outcomes. They aren't creating great political environments or cultural environments around them. We've watched multiple elections go through where the impact of those feed algorithms was dramatic and not necessarily in a positive way. and we're feeling tired now because we've beaten ourselves over the head.
And it's crazy, despite what should be those tough lessons, how AI perpetuates that. So I'm sure you know this, but I heard some crazy stat about the number of young adults that are going to AI before a therapist, or they're leaving their therapist behind. Even as AI was written to please you, satisfy you, affirm you.
I would say, if you want some really good reading, go to Anthropic's website and read their academic articles they have about the flaws they've seen and addressed, or seen and not been able to address in the use of those algorithms and all the different circumstances that they find themselves.
Yeah.
I wrote an article, it's on LinkedIn, you can find it, about why artificial intelligence isn't intelligent. And what it comes down to is the basic approach is kind of a law of large numbers mathematical situation where it's going to drive you a reversion to the mean, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're going to get an average answer. Well, average isn't the best answer. It's not a top-performing answer. It's not the right answer. It's just the average answer. It's the I'm not going to get fired answer. It's the seems reasonable answer. It's the most believable answer, but it may or may not be accurate. And the reason we do that is because there's kind of the wisdom of the crowd. We kind of believe the general corpus of all human intellectual property should be able to find us something that's usable. If you're a below average person, AI is going to get you up to average. But if you're an above average performer in some field and you rely on it, it's going to drag you back down to average. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge, I think,
is it safe to say, qualify that by saying depending on how you use it, or is it that not even?
No, it only can drag you to average from either side. So can a above average person use AI and not pay attention to its influence? Sure. Right. I have developers every day who are way better at coding than AI is, and use AI for code completion because it's way better than the old, library code completion tools. Do they rely on it for all their judgment and design and architecture? No.
So I want to thank you for having this conversation, and just kind of as a closing reflection, say, I don't know about you, but I am just so thankful to be alive right now. And I know it kind of sounds weird, right? Like, I think everybody, if you ask them, well, what's the zeitgeist? Uncertainty, chaos. And I actually am grateful to know this greater story of redemption. And I don't know where it ends, where we transition to what's next. But what I see is that we have a revolution going on that, on the one hand, allows builders to create new value if they're thoughtful and if they're rooted, like you discussed. And on the other hand, maybe that same tool brings us back to what it means to be fully human, right, and engage with each other. All points that you wonderfully touched on. Early on, I remember you and I would share YouTube videos, and inevitably it would be the rare roundtable discussion where people that didn't necessarily agree theologically, right, just got in there and wrestled with it, right? Yeah. And they just brought it, and they were comfortable, and they walked away and loved each other. Like you and I shared that, like, man, we need more of that. I feel like we had that.
We definitely did. Thank you.
So I appreciate you being on here. What would be a couple of takeaways you hope somebody would take from our conversation?
Well, I hope they'll go out and get a copy of the God Hour, a 60-day leadership journal, and My Body is for Myself if you have children in your life. And more importantly, that you still have a choice. And if you focus that on being a blessing, on loving the people that are in front of you, on empowering them to have their best life, on serving them with meaning and with purpose, and on safeguarding the things of actual value in life, all the technology can keep on rolling, all the chaos can keep on happening. Jesus said there will be wars and rumors of wars, there will be earthquakes and famines, and all these things are going to continue to happen. The end is not yet. And I think we've spent a lot of time in Hollywood talking about a dystopian future and worrying about it, and now we're rapidly running into it because people have lost the awareness that they have a choice. I think Gen Z in particular is particularly strong at making that choice. I think we need to lean into that and realize that the authentic relationship, the authentic connection, that feeling of intimacy and knowing, that Ganosko relationship, is at the end of the day the purpose of life, and we need to discover that and build the communities and build the families and build the countries that are going to value that, prioritize that, and let technologies come in as a servant to that.
It is an opportunity. It is a calling, right? So it's beautiful. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.